Prepare yourself for a journey across centuries, continents, and the limitless depths of the human imagination. In this video, we're summoning the power of 5 monumental works of literature, stories that have shaped cultures, challenged conventions, and ignited the imagination of readers for generations. From the grand battlefields of ancient myth to the stormy nights of a scientist's secret laboratory, from the gritty streets of 19th century Paris to the surreal visions of Soviet-era Moscow, and finally into the swirling tapestry of a newly independent India. These are epic tales that have stood the test of time. Join us as we embark on a quest through the pages of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the Iliad by Homer, Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, the Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, and Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. Each one holds keys to understanding the complexity of human nature, our deepest fears, and our boundless hopes. Our odyssey begins with a spark of madness in a lonely laboratory. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is more than just the birth of science fiction. It's a chilling exploration of ambition and morality. Next, we harken back to the thunderous clash of warriors on the plains of Troy, where the Iliad immortalizes heroes and gods alike, reminding us that honor, rage, and destiny are inexorably woven into the human experience. Then, prepare to be swept away into the roiling underbelly of 19th century Paris with Les Misérables, Victor Hugo's grand masterpiece of love, justice, and redemption that transcends class and time. Each page is a rallying cry for compassion in a tumultuous world. From there, we cross into the satirical magic of Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, where the devil himself strolls through Moscow's streets, orchestrating chaos that forces us to question the very fabric of good and evil. Finally, our voyage crescendos with Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, an epic tapestry where one child's birth coincides with the dawn of a nation, binding the hero's fate to that of his country, where personal identity and national destiny collide in fantastic yet painfully real ways. These 5 timeless classics offer a mirror for our innermost desires and fears, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder of storytelling's eternal power. So, gather your curiosity and sense of adventure. Together, let's unravel the heart of these monumental works and discover why they continue to captivate minds across the globe. Welcome to our celebration of 5 essential literary legends. Imagine we open on a bleak, frozen ocean somewhere in the far northern seas. An endless expanse of ice, cold winds that howl across the desolate landscape, and a ship struggling to break through the ice floes. The year is the late 18th century, and a young, ambitious explorer named Robert Walton has embarked on an expedition to reach the North Pole, or at least penetrate farther into the Arctic than anyone before him. He dreams of fame, of unraveling the mysteries of Earth's most remote regions. But what he finds out there, in the deadly chill at the top of the world, is far stranger and more harrowing than any geographical discovery he could have imagined. In the midst of this perilous journey, his ship becomes trapped in ice. The crew, though steadfast, is frightened and uncertain. One morning, as the gray light filters across the ice, Walton and his men spot something astonishing: a gaunt, half-frozen figure drifting toward them on a fragment of ice. The stranger is barely alive, clinging to the last threads of his strength. The crew brings him aboard, determined to save his life. They do not yet realize that they have rescued a man whose story, once he is well enough to speak, will unravel a chain of events so haunting and tragic that it might reshape their understanding of what it means to be human, to create life, and to face the consequences of one's own ambition. This stranger is Victor Frankenstein, and as he begins to recover from his ordeal, he entrusts Walton with the terrible tale of how he came to be here in the Arctic wastes, chasing something monstrous and elusive. Walton, who has been writing letters to his beloved sister back in England, takes careful note. Through Victor's sorrowful narrative, we journey back to his youthful days in Geneva, Switzerland, and trace the path that led him to the brink of madness and heartbreak. Victor Frankenstein's story is both a confession and a warning, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked ambition, the loneliness of the misunderstood, and the moral responsibilities of creators for their creations. Victor Frankenstein was born into a well-to-do, loving family. Raised in Geneva, he enjoyed an idyllic childhood. His father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a kind, honorable man, and his mother, Caroline, was compassionate and caring. They took an Elizabeth Lavenza, an orphan girl of noble birth, whom Victor came to love dearly as they grew up together like siblings. But from the start, there was a sense that Elizabeth represented something pure, a beacon of goodness Victor cherished. They also had Victor's brothers, Ernest and the younger, sweet-natured William, forming a happy, close-knit household. From an early age, Victor was different, marked by an intense intellectual curiosity. He devoured the works of ancient alchemists and natural philosophers, reading about the secrets of life and the possibility of reanimating lifeless matter. Though these old texts were outdated, discredited, and considered pseudoscience, to Victor's young mind they crackled with possibility. He dreamed of discovering the principles of life itself, of seizing nature's secrets and using them to banish disease and death. As he grew older, Victor's father recognized the need for a proper education to channel his son's formidable intellect. Victor set off for the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. There he encountered professors who would shape his destiny. M. Krempe, who dismissed his earlier studies as nonsense, and M. Waldman, who recognized Victor's potential and encouraged him to pursue modern science, chemistry, physiology, the real building blocks of understanding life. Under Waldman's mentorship, Victor threw himself passionately into scientific study, spending days and nights in the lab, obsessed with penetrating the veil between life and death. Victor's studies eventually led him to a horrifying yet enthralling line of inquiry. He believed he could reanimate dead tissue. He did not share his goals openly. The nature of his project was too macabre, too morally dubious. He worked in secret, scavenging charnel houses and graveyards for pieces of corpses. The details are grim. Limbs collected under the cover of darkness, instruments and chemicals that reeked of death. Victor, in his manic fervor, ignored the moral implications. He believed that if he could just do this extraordinary thing, create life, he would become a benefactor to mankind, freeing people from mortality's shadow. It felt almost holy, but it was also a violation of the natural order. After countless days of feverish labor, Victor succeeded. In a candlelit room on a stormy night, the creature, a giant, roughly 8 feet tall, pieced together from various human remains, shuddered into life. But the instant this new being opened its watery, yellow eyes, Victor recoiled in horror. The creature's features were hideous. Its yellowish skin barely covered the muscles and blood vessels beneath. Its black lips were straight and thin, and despite Victor's painstaking efforts, nothing could disguise the patchwork reality of this unnatural body. Instead of euphoria, Victor felt disgust. He had envisioned a beautiful being, a new Adam of his own making. Instead, he beheld an abomination. Overcome with dread and regret, Victor fled from his laboratory and abandoned his creation. Having spent 2 years obsessed with his experiment, Victor now collapsed into a delirious illness. He avoided the laboratory, not daring to face what he had created. Meanwhile, the creature, alone in the world, struggled to understand its existence. It was born fully formed physically, but with the mind of a blank slate, frightened, sensitive, and curious. Finding itself abandoned, it wandered into the world outside. Without guidance or language, it survived on what it could forage. It discovered sensations like cold, hunger, and fear. It longed for companionship and kindness, but met only terror and violence. Everywhere it went, people shrank away in horror or tried to harm it, mistaking it for a monster because of its dreadful appearance. Back in Ingolstadt, Victor's close friend, Henry Clerval, arrived to nurse him back to health. With Henry's kindness and the passage of time, Victor recovered from his nervous breakdown. He tried to bury thoughts of the creature, pretending it was nothing but a nightmare. News from home beckoned him to return. It was then that a letter reached him bearing tragedy. William, the youngest Frankenstein brother, had been found murdered. With a heavy heart, Victor set out for Geneva. At night, beneath the gloomy skies, as he visited the scene of the crime, he glimpsed a massive, distorted figure lurking in the shadows. He realized in a flash of horror that his own creation was responsible. Even worse, a beloved family servant, Justine Moritz, a kind-hearted young woman brought up by the Frankensteins, was accused of the crime, as incriminating evidence was found in her possession. Unable to reveal the truth of his hideous progeny, and terrified of the scandal, Victor remained silent. He watched helplessly as Justine, declaring her innocence but pressured to confess in hope of mercy, was condemned and executed. This moment marked the start of Victor's downward spiral into guilt, despair, and moral torment. The creature, which he had thoughtlessly loosed upon the world, had now claimed 2 innocent lives, William by direct action, and Justine indirectly, through injustice and Victor's silence. Broken by guilt and grief, Victor sought solace in the alpine landscapes near the Frankenstein home. He wandered through sublime scenery, towering mountains, cascading waterfalls, trying to find peace or at least a sense of humility against nature's immense backdrop. It was in these solitary wanderings that the creature found him. The monstrous being approached him on a remote glacier and spoke with surprising eloquence and reason. Victor, enraged and horrified, cursed the creature, but the being pleaded for understanding. How could Victor hate him? It asked, since Victor was the one who created and then abandoned him. Despite Victor's fury, the creature calmly began to recount its life story. It described how, after escaping Victor's workshop, it learned about the world by observing a family of cottagers, the de Lacys. This family, an old blind father and his grown children, lived in a modest home in the forest. They were impoverished but compassionate. The creature secretly watched them through a chink in the wall, gradually learning their language, their customs, their moral values. He absorbed their kindness and yearned to be accepted by them. He even tried to help them secretly by gathering firewood at night. As it acquired speech and a sense of morality from these unsuspecting teachers, the creature came to understand concepts like love, virtue, and justice. But when the creature finally dared to reveal itself to the de Lacy family, hoping the blind old father, unprejudiced by sight, would listen to its pleas, everything went wrong. The old man's children returned unexpectedly, saw the monstrous figure, and reacted with horror and violence. They fled their home in fear, leaving the creature devastated. This crushing rejection taught it that no matter how kind, how learned, or how gentle it tried to be, its grotesque face would damn it in the eyes of humanity. Anger and sadness warred within it. In its despair, it resolved to seek out its creator to demand answers, and ultimately found the path that led it to Switzerland. On the journey, it saved a young girl from drowning only to be shot by a terrified bystander. Wounded in both body and soul, its bitterness against mankind grew. Reaching Geneva, the creature encountered young William Frankenstein, and, hoping a child's innocence would make him more open-minded, tried to befriend him. But the boy panicked, and in the struggle, the creature unintentionally strangled him. Realizing the boy's connection to Victor, it saw William's death as a twisted form of revenge. By framing Justine, it inflicted more pain on Victor's family. Now face to face with Victor on the glacier, the creature admitted all this. But it did not seek blind vengeance. It longed for companionship. It asked Victor to create a mate for it, a female being just as hideous, who would understand its condition and share its life, so it would no longer be alone. In exchange, the creature promised that the two would vanish into the wilds of South America, never to trouble humanity again. At first, Victor refused. The idea of repeating his horrible act seemed unimaginable. But the creature's argument was powerful. It was Victor who owed it some measure of happiness, since he brought it into the world so miserably equipped. Feeling a deep responsibility and hoping to rid himself of the creature's menace, Victor reluctantly agreed. He would create a female companion. The creature, satisfied with the promise, left Victor to his work. Haunted by his agreement, Victor returned home, but he found no happiness there. He was burdened by secrets and horrors he could share with no one. He tried to postpone his dark task, but the creature's shadow seemed to loom everywhere. Eventually, he traveled to England and then to a remote Scottish island to work in isolation. Henry Clerval accompanied him to England, marveling at the sights and enjoying the journey, while Victor was increasingly preoccupied and distant. Fear ate at him, fear of what he was about to unleash upon the world. If he gave the creature a mate, might they breed and create a whole race of monsters? Could these beings become a threat to humanity? Might the female, once animated, reject the creature and cause even more misery? Victor's conscience tormented him. He was stuck between pity for the creature's suffering and terror of making the situation worse. One night, at the brink of completion, Victor looked up and saw the creature's ghastly form grinning at him through the window of his workshop on the Scottish island. Overcome by revulsion and fear of the consequences, Victor destroyed the half-finished female. He tore her apart before bringing her to life. With a howl of anguish, the creature vanished into the darkness, but not before vowing revenge. It swore that it would be with Victor on his wedding night, a chilling promise that lingered in Victor's mind, sowing seeds of dread. The next day, Victor tried to dispose of the remains of his aborted creation in the sea, but storms blew him off course. He washed ashore in Ireland, where a fresh horror awaited him. Henry Clerval's body had been found strangled. The local authorities, suspicious of Victor's sudden arrival, arrested him for the crime. For months, Victor languished in prison, sick and nearly insane with grief. Though eventually he was cleared of the crime, there was evidence he wasn't near the murder scene. His spirit was broken. He had lost his dearest friend to his own unholy meddling. Each death traced back to him and the creature he had unleashed. His father arrived to care for him, and once Victor recovered enough, they returned to Geneva. By now, the family had gone through so much sorrow. William was dead, Justine was executed, and now Henry was gone. Victor's only hope lay in some semblance of future happiness. He still loved Elizabeth, who had been waiting patiently for him all these years. They decided to marry, hoping that wedlock might bring peace and allow Victor to heal from these horrifying traumas. But Victor knew the creature's ominous warning: "I shall be with you on your wedding night." Interpreting this as a threat to himself, Victor armed himself and planned to confront the creature after the wedding. Perhaps he still believed he could face the monster and end the cycle of misery. The wedding took place, and for a brief time, there was a fragile joy. Elizabeth was radiant and kind, truly devoted to Victor. They traveled to a remote cottage where they would spend their wedding night. Victor paced nervously, expecting the creature to burst in at any moment. He told Elizabeth to retire to her bedchamber while he checked the grounds. But while he searched, panic mounting, he suddenly heard Elizabeth's scream echo through the halls. Rushing back, he found her lifeless body, strangled by those enormous hands. The creature had not meant to threaten Victor's life, but to destroy all that Victor loved. In that instant, all that was dear to Victor perished. Soon afterward, Alphonse Frankenstein, grief-stricken at the cumulative tragedies, died as well. Now utterly alone, mother, father, brothers, friend, and beloved wife all gone, Victor was consumed by vengeance. Any traces of guilt or pity he once felt toward the creature hardened into hatred. He swore a great and terrible oath. He would pursue the creature across the world and destroy it or die trying. Thus began a relentless chase. The creature, grimly satisfied that it had inflicted a pain equal to what it had suffered, led Victor on a chase through Europe, then toward the frozen Arctic. The two adversaries became entwined in a dance of death, one always just out of reach of the other. Following clues left by the creature, sometimes bits of food, sometimes mocking messages, Victor tracked it northward. He pushed himself and his sledge dogs past the boundaries of human endurance. He nearly starved, froze, and drowned, but still he pressed on. In the vast silence of the Arctic, their mutual hatred burned bright against a background of white emptiness. It was in this desperate state that Walton's ship finally encountered Victor, half dead on the ice, still chasing his elusive foe. Now, aboard Walton's ship, Victor unburdened himself of his tragic tale, hoping to warn Walton against reckless ambition. He implored Walton not to follow his own path of monstrous hubris. Here, Victor's character had changed drastically from the ardent student of Ingolstadt. He was a ruined man, racked by the agony of loss and regret. Walton, deeply moved, began to question his own ambitious pursuit of the North Pole. Should he risk his crew and his life for glory, knowing the cost that ambition had exacted from Victor? Shortly after telling his story, Victor's health deteriorated further. He lingered for some time, still cursing the creature, still longing to fulfill his vow of revenge, but he was too weak. Eventually, Victor Frankenstein died aboard the ship. With his death, it seemed the last hope of punishing the creature had vanished. That very night, Walton and his crew, who had been debating whether to continue north or turn back, witnessed something extraordinary. The creature appeared on the ship, slipping aboard silently. It stood over Victor's corpse, filled with a strange mixture of remorse, grief, and self-loathing. In eloquent words, it spoke to Walton, confessing the misery of its existence. It had never wanted to be evil, never wanted to harm the innocent. It had longed for love and companionship, only to be met with universal rejection. The creature's violent acts, it claimed, were born out of despair and a desperate attempt to make its creator feel the same loneliness and pain it had endured. Now, Seeing Victor dead, its father, its god, its enemy, left the creature adrift in regret. It realized that the cycle of vengeance had led only to emptiness. Without Victor, the creature had no purpose. It declared that it would go far away to the northernmost reaches of the ice and end its own life by building a funeral pyre. On that pyre, it would consume itself in flames, erasing every trace of its cursed existence. Then it departed into the dark, frozen wastes, its form soon lost to sight. Walton and his crew, shaken and full of sorrow, decided to turn the ship southward, returning home with a cautionary tale of ambition and horror. By the time the story concludes, the audience is left with profound questions. What does it mean to be responsible for our creations? Be they children, art, inventions, or scientific breakthroughs? Victor Frankenstein's greatest sin was not that he tried to understand life's secrets. It was his failure to take responsibility for what he created. Instead of caring for the creature and teaching it, he abandoned it, leaving it to the cruelties of the world. This dereliction of duty set the tragedy in motion. The novel also wrestles with the idea of appearances versus inner nature. The creature is hideous to the eye, and because of that, nearly everyone treats it as a monster. Yet in its earliest days, it is gentle, curious, and caring. Only rejection, isolation, and hatred turn it into a murderer. Mary Shelley's story suggests that the monstrousness we fear in others is often of our own making. Prejudice, fear, and cruelty can warp even the purest spirit into something vengeful. There's a powerful moral argument here about empathy and understanding. Had anyone shown the creature genuine kindness and acceptance, how different might its fate have been? Another central theme is the danger of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Victor yearned to conquer death, to become a creator of life, without understanding the moral and ethical weight of that power. His great intellect and passion led him down a path of destruction. Similarly, Walton's quest for the North Pole mirrors Victor's misguided ambition. By listening to Victor's cautionary tale, Walton learns that some conquests are not worth the potential moral cost. He values human life and returns home, saving himself and his crew from a pointless demise. Beyond these moral lessons, Frankenstein also reflects on loneliness and alienation. Both Victor and the creature suffer immense isolation. Victor isolates himself in obsessive study, cutting himself off from family and friends. The creature is isolated from birth, finding no companion or equal in the entire world. Elizabeth and Henry represent warmth and connection, but they are brutally snatched away, emphasizing the tragic consequences of being cut adrift from human love and support. The setting of Frankenstein shifts across Europe and beyond, providing a rich, atmospheric backdrop. Early on, we have Geneva's calm lake and comfortable homes, symbolizing innocence and family love. Then Ingolstadt's university town, with its laboratories and libraries, is the birthplace of Victor's obsession. The natural world, sublime mountains, vast lakes, and glaciers, often serves as a mirror to Victor's inner turmoil. In these stunning landscapes, he tries to find solace or at least perspective. The final chase takes us into the Arctic wastes, an inhospitable realm where human constructs, morality, civilization, reason, feel tenuous and fragile. Here, stripped down to survival and vengeance, both creator and creation confront their final destiny. The harshness of the ice and cold echoes the chill in Victor's heart and the hopelessness that befalls them both. Throughout, Shelley uses these settings not just as scenery, but as reflections of the characters' emotional states. The majesty and terror of nature stand in contrast to the ugliness of what transpires between man and monster. Humanity tries to bend nature to its will, but nature remains indifferent, grand, and dangerous. Ultimately, the quest for control over nature, over life, leads to ruin. The emotional journey of Frankenstein is intense and turbulent. We begin with curiosity and wonder as we hear about Victor's dreams of discovering life's secret. We sense his youthful optimism and the warmth of his family. But as the story unfolds, the tone grows darker. First, the horror of the creature's birth, then the creeping sense of guilt and dread as it roams free. The murders shock us, and Justine's execution brings a painful sense of injustice. The middle portion of the novel, where the creature tells its story, stirs our empathy. We see how it yearned for kindness and recoiled at cruelty, how it might have been good if given a chance. It's a heartbreaking irony. The monster is perhaps the most sensitive soul in the book, yet fated to be seen as evil. As Victor and the creature become locked in a cycle of revenge, the mood becomes tragic and inescapable. With each death, William, Justine, Henry, Elizabeth, the emotional stakes rise, and we realize no happy ending is possible. By the end, when Victor dies and the creature mourns over his body, we feel an overwhelming sense of loss and remorse. Neither character emerges victorious. Instead, their story stands as a testament to miscommunication, failed responsibility, and the destructive power of resentment. In closing, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is far more than a simple horror story. It's a layered narrative about humanity's capacity for invention and destruction, about the need for compassion, and about the responsibilities that come with power. Through Victor's confession and the creature's eloquent testimony, we gain insight into the human condition. The story encourages us to reflect on what we owe each other, how we judge by appearances, and where we draw the line between daring exploration and moral responsibility. The final image of the creature disappearing into the Arctic night remains haunting. It vanishes to die alone, taking with it all its sorrow and bitterness, and leaving us to ponder what might have been if only empathy had won out over fear. Even though Frankenstein is set in a distant past and a time of early scientific exploration, its themes remain timeless. They speak to any era in which humans push the boundaries of knowledge and power, reminding us that our creations, be they technological, scientific, or social, will reflect our own moral character. If we fail to guide them with empathy and understanding, we risk creating something we cannot bear to face. This is the tragic, cautionary tale that Victor Frankenstein imparts to Robert Walton, and by extension, to all of us. It's not just a story of monsters and murder, but a profound meditation on love, responsibility, identity, and the fragile nature of human aspirations. By the end, we understand why Victor chased his creation into the cold ends of the earth, and why, after hearing this story, Walton decides to turn his ship around. We, too, are left to carry these lessons with us, understanding that knowledge and power are not inherently evil, but must be tempered with ethics, empathy, and a profound respect for the lives we touch. Imagine standing on the plains of ancient Troy, the mighty walls looming in the distance, the afternoon sun beating down on dusty fields littered with broken chariots, shattered shields, and fallen spears. On one side, the Greek armies stretch out, row upon row of warriors who have sailed across the Aegean Sea, driven by duty, anger, and destiny. On the other side, the proud city of Troy stands firm, its citizens sheltering behind towering ramparts and legendary defenders. The clash between these two worlds has raged for nearly a decade now, leaving fields red and hearts heavy. This is the setting of Homer's The Iliad, an ancient Greek epic centered not just on the Trojan War, but on the intense emotions, loyalties, betrayals, and heroic deeds that make us human. Today, we'll journey through this timeless epic, unraveling its characters, tracing its conflicts, and feeling the full spectrum of human passions that drive these legendary figures toward glory or doom. The story begins in the war's 10th year. At this point, the Greek armies, also called Achaeans, have been encamped outside Troy's fortified walls for what feels like an eternity. They've come to lay siege to the city after the Trojan Prince Paris abducted the beautiful Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus. Her departure sparked a mighty alliance of Greek kings, united under the leadership of the powerful but often prideful King Agamemnon of Mycenae. Among these Greeks stand famous warriors: Odysseus of Ithaca, known for his cunning; Ajax the Great, renowned for his size and strength; Diomedes, fierce and bold; Menelaus, fighting for his lost wife's honor; and above all, Achilles, the greatest warrior of his generation, blessed or cursed with near immortality and unmatched martial skill. By now, the Greeks are weary. Supplies are low, tempers are high, and the prize they are all fighting for, Troy's fall, remains elusive. Imagine the heat of the day as the Achaeans lounge in their dusty encampment, waiting for orders, itching for a breakthrough. It is into this charged atmosphere that Homer introduces us to the central conflict that will shape the course of the narrative: the rift between Achilles and Agamemnon. Though both are on the same side, Achilles and Agamemnon are locked in a struggle over honor and respect. Recently, the Greeks have sacked a neighboring town allied with Troy, and in the spoils, each leader received a captive woman. Agamemnon took Chryses, Achilles took Briseis. But Chryses' father, a priest of Apollo, prays for his daughter's return. And in response, the god Apollo unleashes a devastating plague on the Greek camp. The disease sweeps through the ranks, killing warriors, weakening morale, and forcing the Greeks to consider appeasing Apollo. They realize that restoring Chryses to her father might lift the curse. However, Agamemnon, driven by pride, refuses at first. When he's finally pressured to give her up, he decides to compensate himself by seizing Achilles' captive, Briseis. This act is more than just taking a woman. For Achilles, it's an assault on his very honor. Achilles, who has fought valiantly and earned glory and respect, sees this as a personal insult. To understand Achilles' rage, consider his role. He fights because glory is the closest thing to immortality, and honor is the currency by which a hero's name lives on forever. By taking away his prize, Agamemnon demeans Achilles' status and worth. Achilles' reaction is explosive. In a passionate confrontation, Achilles nearly draws his sword to kill Agamemnon on the spot. The tension is palpable, the greatest warrior on the brink of murdering his own commander. Only the intervention of the goddess Athena, who invisibly restrains Achilles, prevents Greek-on-Greek bloodshed. Humiliated and furious, Achilles withdraws from battle. He refuses to fight for Agamemnon any longer, calling on his mother, the sea nymph Thetis, to persuade Zeus, king of the gods, to punish the Greeks by letting the Trojans gain the upper hand. Achilles effectively abandons his comrades, retreating to his tent with bitterness in his heart. This decision will shape the course of the war in ways no one yet foresees. In the world of the Iliad, mortal affairs are never entirely separate from the divine. The Olympian gods watch, intervene, and bicker among themselves. Zeus, mighty and stern, tries to maintain some semblance of fate's balance, while Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, Ares, and others take sides, often favoring one faction or hero over another. The Trojan War, in this telling, isn't just human bravado. It's a stage on which the gods play out their rivalries and dramas. Thetis's plea to Zeus is granted. Zeus decrees that without Achilles' spear and shield on the battlefield, the Greeks will start losing ground. Suddenly, the emboldened Trojans push forward. Picture the dusty plains coming to life with Trojan chariots sweeping through Greek lines, arrows raining down on once confident warriors. The Greeks, without their champion Achilles, begin to flounder. As Achilles sulks in his tent, the narrative zooms in on various leaders trying to rally the Greeks. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, and others call musters, attempt strategies, and try to fortify their weakened defenses. The battles that follow are not mere skirmishes. They are brutal tests of endurance, skill, and courage. In the thick of it all, we meet heroes from both sides in vivid detail. Diomedes, who at one point is granted extraordinary strength and fury by Athena and even dares to wound the gods themselves. Odysseus, always quick-witted, saving warriors and restoring order where chaos reigns. And the towering figure of Ajax, a human fortress holding the line. On the Trojan side, Hector emerges as the noblest champion. Eldest son of King Priam and brother to Paris, Hector is a loving husband and father who fights for the honor and safety of his city. Unlike Paris, who started this whole war by abducting Helen and prefers to linger in the comfort of his chamber, Hector tirelessly leads Trojan attacks. He's the backbone of Trojan resistance, admired by friends and respected by foes. Here, the poem shows us Hector's deeply human side. He has doubts, fears, and loves. He understands that Troy might not withstand the Greek onslaught forever. Yet he stands firm, a paragon of duty and courage. These middle segments of the epic are heavy with combat, but also rich in character portraits. Heroes shine and falter. Minor characters step forward and perish, and the cycle of violence grinds on. Each death is described with grim clarity, showing the audience that glory is always purchased at a high price. On these fields, Achilles' absence is keenly felt. The Greeks need him, and yet his pride and wounded honor keep him distant. As the Trojans drive the Greeks back to their ships, panic begins to set in. Trojans threaten to burn the Greek ships, stranding them far from home. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Agamemnon finally comes to terms with the cost of his arrogance. He sends a delegation to Achilles' tent, loaded with promises. If Achilles returns to the fight, he will receive great riches, countless treasures, fine horses, even the hand of one of Agamemnon's daughters in marriage. Most importantly, Agamemnon promises to return Briseis and swear he never touched her intimately. This embassy, led by Odysseus, is one of the most emotionally charged scenes of the Iliad. Achilles receives his old friends with a cold heart. No matter what they offer, his pride feels too deeply wounded. He condemns Agamemnon's arrogance and questions the worthiness of fighting for men who do not respect him. Achilles reveals a profound existential crisis. He reminds the ambassadors that his mother Thetis revealed two possible fates for him. If he stays at Troy, he will die young, but his name will live forever. If he returns home, he will live a long but unremarkable life. The embassy fails, Achilles will not return. Yet in these conversations, we see Achilles' bitterness also reveals a man torn by inner conflict. He is not merely sulking, he is wrestling with destiny itself. The glory he once craved now seems tainted. The war no longer feels like a noble pursuit. Still, he stands firm in his refusal. With Achilles unmoved, the situation for the Greeks worsens. Hector leads a bold Trojan offensive that pushes right to the edge of the Greek camp. Greek walls, hastily built, are crumbling. The Trojans threaten to set the ships aflame. Among the Greeks, despair spreads like wildfire. Now Achilles' closest friend and companion, Patroclus, emerges as a key figure. Patroclus is gentle and compassionate by nature, quite unlike Achilles in temperament, though he's also a capable warrior. He sees the suffering of the Greeks and begs Achilles to relent. If Achilles will not fight himself, will he at least allow Patroclus to wear his armor and lead Achilles' own contingent of soldiers, the Myrmidons, in a battle? The sight of Achilles' armor alone might rally the Greeks and scare the Trojans. Achilles, still unwilling to join the fray himself, grants this request. He gives Patroclus his blessing but warns him, drive the Trojans back from the ships, but do not attempt to storm the city walls. Achilles wants to protect his dear friend from overreaching. This moment is crucial. The two men share a bond that transcends the ordinary warrior's camaraderie. There is deep love, whether viewed as platonic brotherhood or something more, between Achilles and Patroclus. Patroclus enters the battle wearing Achilles' shining armor, and the battlefield explodes with renewed energy. The Greeks rally, believing their mightiest champion has returned. The Trojans fall back, and Patroclus, caught in the elation of victory, presses onward. He forgets Achilles' warning and pursues the Trojans up to the very gates of Troy. It is here that Patroclus encounters fate. The Trojan prince Hector confronts him, and in the struggle that follows, helped by the god Apollo who strikes Patroclus and disrupts his defenses, Hector delivers the fatal blow. Patroclus falls, and the Greeks lose not only a brave warrior, but Achilles' cherished friend. When news of Patroclus' death reaches Achilles, the emotional force of the moment is devastating. Achilles is overwhelmed by grief. His anger, once directed at Agamemnon, now finds a new target: Hector and every Trojan who stands by him. The death of Patroclus ignites a kind of berserker rage in Achilles. The old dilemma that kept him from fighting, his pride, his argument with Agamemnon, fades to insignificance. Now, nothing matters except avenging his friend. Thetis, Achilles' divine mother, senses her son's despair and visits him. She commissions Hephaestus, the god of the forge, to craft magnificent new armor for Achilles, as his old set was taken by Hector from Patroclus' body. The new armor is a masterpiece. Its shield is inlaid with intricate designs depicting the cosmos, towns at peace and war, fields being plowed, vineyards harvested, images that reflect the entire human condition. This shield symbolizes a universal perspective that Achilles has yet to fully grasp. Life encompasses more than the battlefield, and human existence is a tapestry of joy, suffering, creation, and destruction. Armed now with divine armor, Achilles emerges to fight again. The Greeks, seeing him at last, are inspired to regroup. The Trojans, faced with Achilles' return, quake with fear. Even Hector, brave as he is, feels the weight of Achilles' wrath. Before rejoining the battle, Achilles and Agamemnon reconcile. Agamemnon gives a speech blaming delusion sent by the gods for his earlier actions and reaffirms Achilles' honor. Achilles, however, is too consumed by fury to care much about apologies. His only thought is vengeance. Achilles' return to the battlefield is terrifying. He rages through Trojan ranks like a wildfire, cutting down warriors left and right. Here, the poem does not shy away from brutality. Achilles becomes almost godlike in his killing spree, but also loses some of his humanity. He doesn't just fight, he slaughters. His anger is so intense that at one point, the very river scamander, choked with the bodies of slain Trojans, protests Achilles' fury and attempts to drown him in its currents. It takes the intervention of gods to save Achilles from the angry river. This scene is symbolic. Nature itself rebels against Achilles' extreme violence. In this carnage, the poem illustrates a profound theme. Achilles' heroic excellence, his arete, has turned into something monstrous. His wrath, once personal, now threatens to unbalance the natural and moral order. We see both the greatness and the horror of an unchecked hero. Achilles' greatness is unquestionable, but his compassion is diminished. Eventually, Achilles confronts Hector outside the walls of Troy. This is one of the epic's most anticipated showdowns. Hector, knowing the gods have abandoned him, still stands firm. Yet when he finally faces Achilles, fear overtakes him and he runs around the city walls 3 times. Achilles in relentless pursuit. It is the goddess Athena who tricks Hector by taking the form of his brother Deiphobus, convincing him to stop running and turn to fight. Realizing he is alone and betrayed by the gods, Hector faces Achilles bravely, trying to bargain that the victor will return the loser's body for proper burial. Achilles refuses. No mercy will be given. They clash in a flurry of spears and swords, but Hector is doomed. Achilles' spear finds its mark in Hector's throat, and Troy's greatest defender falls. Hector's last request, to have his body returned to his father Priam, is coldly denied. Achilles ties Hector's lifeless body to his chariot and drags it in the dust before the walls of Troy, magnifying the Trojans' grief. This savage act horrifies even some of Achilles' own allies. Hector was a noble enemy, a man of honor, courage, and love for his family and city. His murder and mistreatment break the heart of Troy and signal a grim future. Inside Troy, King Priam, Queen Hecuba, and Hector's wife Andromache weep. The loss of Hector feels like the very soul of Troy has been ripped away. Achilles, for his part, is still not satisfied. The anger that drove him to kill Hector lingers. Each day, he drags Hector's body around Patroclus' funeral pyre. The gods, disturbed by this desecration, protect Hector's corpse from decay and mutilation. Something must give. Achilles has reached the pinnacle of vengeance, yet he finds no peace. In one of the most emotionally resonant moments of the entire epic, the aged King Priam of Troy sneaks into the Greek camp at night. With the guidance of the god Hermes, Priam passes through enemy lines and enters Achilles' tent unarmed. Here, the scene is intensely poignant. Priam kneels before Achilles and kisses the hands that killed his son. Imagine the raw humanity of that gesture. Priam begs Achilles to return Hector's body. He does not come with threats or weapons, but with sorrow. Priam appeals to Achilles' own sense of loss, reminding him of his father, Peleus, waiting anxiously for his son's return. Just as Peleus would grieve if Achilles died, so Priam grieves now. This encounter transforms Achilles. The final barrier of his anger cracks. He looks upon Priam and, moved by empathy and the shared pain of mortal life, agrees to return Hector's body. In this moment, the great hero rediscovers his humanity. Vengeance yields to compassion. Achilles weeps with Priam, uniting them in a bond of shared grief. He orders his servants to wash and prepare Hector's body with dignity, unseen by Priam, to spare the king the agony of seeing his son's bruised flesh. Achilles promises a temporary truce for Hector's funeral rites. As Priam departs with Hector's body, we sense that Achilles, in letting go of his rage, has grown as a human being. He has confronted the most difficult lesson of all, that suffering touches everyone, friend or foe, and that mercy and empathy are as heroic as any feat of arms. The story concludes not with the fall of Troy, but with Hector's funeral. The Trojans, allowed a reprieve, mourn their prince and prepare his body for cremation and burial. The city's sorrow is deep and lingering. Andromache laments the future of their son, Astyanax, who will grow up without a father. Hecuba and Priam grieve for their beloved son, who once stood as their greatest hope. Helen, too, speaks fondly of Hector, who treated her kindly despite the calamity her presence brought upon Troy. By ending with Hector's funeral rather than a final Greek victory or the famed Trojan horse, which occurs later in the cycle of Trojan War myths, not in the Iliad, Homer's poem focuses on the cost of war, the universality of loss, and the delicate fabric of empathy that can emerge even between enemies. The poem closes with the line, "Such was the burial of Hector, breaker of horses," leaving the audience to reflect on the tragedy and humanity on both sides of this conflict. Although the Iliad is set in a distant mythical past, the themes resonate powerfully through time. Central is the concept of Kleos, glory achieved in battle, and the tension between a glorious but short life and a long, unremarkable existence. Achilles' struggle with this dilemma is a defining arc of the poem. When he withdraws from battle, he questions the worth of glory if it is not accompanied by respect and honor. Patroclus' death forces him to confront the price of pride, and ultimately, through empathy for Priam, Achilles learns that compassion and understanding can transcend hate. The epic also explores the role of fate and the gods. Warriors like Hector and Achilles may be the best of men, but they are still at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Fate weaves through every choice, every battle. The gods, while powerful, are capricious and often mirror human pettiness. Ultimately, human beings stand between divine whim and mortal frailty, forced to find meaning and virtue in a cruel world. Honorable conduct and the treatment of enemies emerge as profound moral questions. Hector's nobility contrasts with Achilles' vengeful brutality, forcing us to ask what truly makes a hero. Is it strength and skill alone, or the ability to show mercy, recognize shared humanity, and honor the dead, even when they wore enemy armor? The Iliad suggests that heroism is complicated and that the greatest warriors must also grapple with moral and emotional complexity. We also see reflections on war's nature. The Iliad does not glamorize violence. It shows how war consumes lives, dreams, and communities. The battlefield scenes are vivid and bloody, and the camera of Homer's narrative often lingers on the pitiful details of a wounded soldier's final breaths. The poem acknowledges that while war can bring glory and fame, it also brings unspeakable sorrow and loss. In the figure of Achilles, first prideful, then enraged, then remorseful, and the figure of Hector, brave, loving, doomed, we encounter the immense emotional stakes of warfare. Both sides suffer losses, both sides claim heroes. In this light, the poem becomes a meditation on the shared vulnerability of all human beings. While the Iliad takes place in a semi-mythical time, it was passed down orally through generations of storytellers before being recorded in writing. It reflects the values and concerns of the ancient Greeks, the importance of honor, the impermanence of life, the pursuit of glory, and the influence of fate and the gods. The epic tradition that the Iliad represents influenced countless works of literature, shaping the idea of the heroic narrative. Its characters, particularly Achilles, remain archetypes of the conflicted hero, capable of immense greatness and crippling weakness. The poem structure, beginning in the 10th year of the war, focusing on a short period in the conflict rather than retelling the entire Trojan saga, allows it to explore characters' inner worlds. The Iliad does not end with a neat resolution. Troy still stands at the end of the poem. Achilles still faces a fate leading to an early death. The Greeks have not returned home. Instead, Homer focuses on a snapshot of the war that reveals universal truths about human nature: pride, loss, love, anger, fear, and reconciliation. As a modern reader or listener, immersing yourself in the Iliad is like stepping into a world both familiar and foreign. Yes, the warriors wear bronze armor and wield spears, and the gods descend from Olympus to metal. But the emotions, the grief of a father losing a son, the rage of a man betrayed by a leader he once respected, the bond of friendship strong enough to defy death, these feel immediate and real. By the end, we've witnessed how great heroes like Achilles and Hector confront destiny. We've seen how the thirst for glory can lead to unforgivable cruelty. We've felt the quiet power of kindness that can break through cycles of violence, as shown when Achilles finally surrenders Hector's body. The Iliad does not preach simple lessons. It offers a tapestry of human experience, leaving us to draw our own conclusions about honor, empathy, mortality, and meaning. The story of the Iliad is a grand, sweeping epic, but it's also a deeply human one. Against the backdrop of a mythic war that shaped an ancient civilization's imagination, we find men and women fighting not only enemies with swords and spears, but their own fears, desires, and fates. We see how pride can spark conflict even among allies, how grief can transform a hero into a monster and then back again, and how compassion can bridge the chasm between warring sides, if only for a moment. When you finish the Iliad, you come away knowing the characters intimately. Achilles, the greatest warrior who learns too late that compassion matters more than wrath. Hector, the noble defender of his city who meets his tragic end with dignity. Priam, the bereaved father who dares to appeal to an enemy's humanity. And countless others who fight and die, shining briefly in the poet's eye before darkness closes over them. You also carry forward the epic's central question. What does it mean to be human in a world defined by struggle, mortality, and the search for lasting meaning? Just as Achilles and Priam found a moment of shared understanding, we too, centuries later, find ourselves sharing the emotional truths woven into Homer's words. Through the dust and spears of battle, through the lamentations of the mourning and the prayers of the hopeful, the Iliad endures as a story that speaks to the core of human experience, an ancient voice reminding us that compassion, honor, and empathy matter, perhaps most profoundly when all else seems lost. Imagine a world shaped in the shadow of the French Revolution and the turbulent decades that follow, of France still finding its moral compass amid poverty, injustice, and hope. This is the universe of Les Misérables, Victor Hugo's sprawling epic set in the early 19th century. Across its many pages and countless subplots, the novel follows a diverse ensemble of characters. Ex-convicts, police inspectors, struggling students, desperate mothers, cunning thieves, and star-crossed lovers. Through a narrative that mixes raw human suffering with moments of profound compassion, redemption, and spiritual awakening. Today, we'll journey together through the entire story, immersing ourselves in its vivid settings, getting to know its unforgettable characters, and understanding how their fates intertwine against the backdrop of Paris's cramped neighborhoods and revolutionary fervor. By the end, you'll know the full arc of Les Misérables, with all its heartbreak and hope laid bare. We begin in the year 1815, not long after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. France is a place struggling to find stability. The old aristocratic order has been toppled, and the monarchy restored, but the common people suffer under grinding poverty and social injustice. It's a world where a stolen loaf of bread can haunt a man for decades, where orphans wander cold streets, and where the law often seems merciless to those at the bottom. Hugo plunges us into this moral landscape to set the stage for one of literature's most remarkable heroes, Jean Valjean. Our first introduction to kindness in this harsh environment comes through Bishop Muriel, Monseigneur Bienvenu, a gentle, saintly figure who lives in a small town called Digny. He's a man who practices what he preaches, giving most of his modest wealth to the poor, extending comfort to the needy, and inspiring everyone around him. Enter Jean Valjean, a gaunt, weathered man fresh from 19 years in prison. He was condemned long ago for stealing bread to feed his starving family, and each escape attempt only extended his sentence. Free at last, he roams from inn to inn, desperately seeking shelter, but no one will host a convict. He's shunned, scorned, and driven into the night. Eventually, he stumbles upon the bishop's residence, and despite learning Valjean's past, the bishop welcomes him warmly, offering food and a bed for the night. This single act of mercy changes Valjean's life, but it doesn't happen immediately. That very night, Valjean succumbs to old habits. He steals the bishop's silverware and flees. The next day, the gendarmes drag him back, caught red-handed. In a stunning gesture, the bishop not only refuses to accuse him, but claims the silver was a gift, and even gives him 2 candlesticks besides. This moment shatters Valjean's worldview. He realizes he's been treated with grace far beyond anything he deserved. The bishop's compassion plants the seed of transformation in Valjean's soul, sending him on a moral journey that will define his entire life. After wrestling with his conscience, he tears up his criminal identity papers, symbolically leaving behind his old self. He resolves to become an honest man and repay the moral debt he owes to the bishop's kindness. Fast forward a few years, and we find ourselves in the industrial town of Montreuil-sur-Mer. Under a new identity, Monsieur Madeleine, Valjean has reinvented himself. He's become a successful factory owner, beloved by the people for his generosity and charity. He builds hospitals, schools, and provides fair wages. Unbeknownst to most, he is the same man who was once branded a dangerous convict. Now he walks upright as a pillar of the community and is even made mayor. It is in this role that he encounters Fantine, one of the novel's most tragic figures. Fantine is a working-class girl who once fell in love with a charming student, had his child, and then was abandoned. Left to raise her daughter Cosette alone, Fantine, desperate for a steady upbringing for her child, left Cosette with the Thénardiers, an innkeeper couple, while she headed to the city to find work. The Thénardiers promised care and protection, but in reality, they are swindlers who mistreat the child, forcing her to do chores and demanding more and more money from Fantine. In Montreuil-sur-Mer, Fantine works at Valjean's factory, but a rumor about her illegitimate child leads to her dismissal, a moment that Valjean is not personally aware of until it's too late. Jobless, Fantine spirals into poverty. She sells her hair, then her front teeth, and finally resorts to prostitution to pay the Thénardier's extortionate demands. One cold night, an arrogant gentleman insults her, and she retaliates. The police arrive and inspect her. Javert, the local authority, wants to arrest her. However, Mayor Madeleine intervenes, saving Fantine from jail. When he learns of her plight, the truth weighs heavily on him. He feels responsible for not managing his workers more compassionately and tries to make amends. He arranges for Fantine's medical care and vows to reunite her with her daughter. But Valjean's past is closing in. Javert, who is fanatically devoted to the letter of the law, has been watching him. Javert suspects that Monsieur Madeleine is actually the fugitive Jean Valjean. When another man is arrested and identified as Valjean by mistake, Valjean faces a crisis of conscience. Allow this innocent man to be condemned in his place, or reveal his true identity and risk losing everything he has built. In a heartrending moral decision, Valjean confesses in court, ensuring the other man's release. He returns to Fantine's bedside, where she is gravely ill. There, Javert arrives to arrest Valjean. The shock kills Fantine, and Valjean promises in her final moments that he will find and care for Cosette. After a dramatic escape, Valjean heads out into the night to fulfill his promise. We shift now to the Thénardiers Inn at Montfermeil, just outside Paris. The Thénardiers are cruel, greedy innkeepers who force little Cosette, Fantine's daughter, into servitude. Cosette is only about 8 years old, dressed in rags, carrying heavy buckets of water through the forest, living a life of fear and misery. Valjean arrives under cover of darkness. He watches as Cosette struggles to fetch water late at night. Moved by pity and remembering his promise, he buys her a beautiful doll and steps in with fatherly tenderness, a kindness the little girl has never known. Valjean negotiates with the unscrupulous Thénardiers. After paying them an enormous sum, he takes Cosette away, effectively becoming her guardian. The two flee to Paris, where Valjean raises her as his own daughter. He is deeply protective, careful never to draw unwanted attention. Cosette transforms under his care, blossoming from a fearful child into a gentle, loving girl. Valjean, who has never had a family, finds true meaning in caring for Cosette. This relationship, a father and daughter bound not by blood but by compassion, becomes the central emotional core of the novel. It's through Cosette that Valjean redeems his past and claims a future built on love and moral integrity. Yet Valjean's freedom is tenuous. Javert is relentless in his pursuit of the convict he once knew. Learning Valjean is at large, Javert prowls the city's streets. To evade him, Valjean and Cosette take refuge in a convent. Hidden behind the high walls and quiet gardens, Valjean works as a gardener, and Cosette is given an education by the nuns. Within these peaceful confines, years pass. The outside world moves on, revolutions simmer, and the next generation grows up. Cosette grows into a graceful, intelligent young woman, sheltered but pure of heart. As time moves forward, we find ourselves in Paris during the early 1830s. The city is restless. Discontent with the monarchy of Louis Philippe, radical ideas circulate among students and working-class citizens. The tension crackles in the air, and political clubs meet in dimly lit rooms. One such group is the Friends of the ABC, young idealists dreaming of equality and justice. They are led by Enjolras, a passionate revolutionary. Among them is Marius Pontmercy, a young law student estranged from his wealthy grandfather. Marius's father was a soldier under Napoleon, but Marius grew up unaware of his father's heroism due to his grandfather's royalist stance. Upon discovering his father's legacy, Marius becomes introspective, independent, and somewhat romantic. Marius lives in a rundown apartment and struggles financially. He's kind-hearted but naive, torn between loyalty to family tradition and admiration for revolutionary ideals. He frequents the Luxembourg Gardens, a serene public space where he eventually catches a glimpse of Valjean and Cosette. They walk quietly, father and daughter, content in each other's company. Marius is instantly smitten with Cosette's beauty and grace. He doesn't know her name, doesn't know her story, but he is enthralled. Cosette, too, notices Marius, and a silent spark ignites between them. Neither speaks, but love has a way of making itself known without words. Meanwhile, the Thénardiers have fallen on hard times. Therein failed, and now they lurk in the slums of Paris, running shady schemes. They call themselves Jondrette now, living in squalor alongside their daughter Eponine and other children. Eponine, once a spoiled child at the inn, has grown into a street-smart but impoverished young woman. She's secretly in love with Marius, who pities her but does not return her feelings. One day, Marius discovers that his neighbors, the Jondrettes, are planning a robbery. Marius is horrified to realize that the target is a benevolent old man and his daughter who recently visited the Jondrettes' apartment to deliver charity. Marius recognizes them as Valjean and Cosette. When the Thénardiers spring their trap, Marius, unsure what to do, hesitates. He's been armed by Javert, who is working undercover and had asked Marius to help catch the criminals in the act. Marius wants to save Cosette and Valjean, but he also remembers that Thénardier once cared for Cosette. Conflicted, he eventually calls the police, and Javert bursts in. Valjean slips away in the confusion, having caught a glimpse of Thénardier's treachery. Now aware that the Thénardiers are nearby, Valjean decides he and Cosette must move again, fearful that they are recognized and that Javert might be close. Marius is devastated. He has lost his only clue to finding Cosette again. Distracted by love, he drifts away from his revolutionary friends. He yearns to find that lovely girl who vanished as abruptly as she appeared. Eponine, eager to please Marius, eventually tracks down Cosette's address. Marius's heart soars. He haunts the garden walls of the house where Valjean and Cosette live. One evening, the young lovers finally speak. It's an enchanting moment. Two souls meeting under starlight, separated by a modest fence, whispering promises of eternal devotion. Cosette, who has lived so long cloistered and protected, feels her world expanding. Marius, who has hovered on the brink of adulthood, grows more decisive and passionate in her presence. Their love is instantaneous, deep, and pure, defying the harsh realities around them. But Valjean's instincts warn him that staying in one place too long is dangerous. Sensing Cosette's distraction and noticing strange signs that they've been discovered, Valjean announces they must leave for England. Cosette is heartbroken at the idea of leaving Marius without explanation. Marius, too, is in despair when he learns of their impending departure. At the same time, the political situation escalates. Following the death of General Lamarck, one of the few public figures beloved by the poor and sympathetic to revolutionary causes, tensions boil over. The Friends of the ABC seize this moment to spark an uprising. They construct barricades in the narrow streets of Paris. Red flags unfurl, muskets are distributed, and songs of liberty echo through the night air. Marius, distraught over losing Cosette, finds himself drawn into the chaos. With no reason to live if she is gone, he heads to the barricade, ready to die for an ideal or be consumed by despair. At the barricade, Enjolras and his companions stand resolute, though their cause seems doomed. The government's forces will soon arrive to crush them. In this tense, smoky setting, a few key figures converge. Gavroche, a street urchin full of mischief and courage, joins the rebels. Eponine, disguised as a boy, appears too. She has intercepted a letter Marius wrote to Cosette, intending to deliver it. Instead of handing it over immediately, she lingers in despairing hope that Marius might notice her devotion. When the fighting begins, she jumps in front of a musket aimed at Marius, sacrificing herself. Dying, she finally gives him Cosette's address. Her last act is one of love, twisted by hopeless longing, yet noble at the end. Heartbroken and fueled by newfound purpose, Marius fights bravely. Outside the barricade, Valjean has discovered Marius's involvement. Realizing that Marius is Cosette's beloved and the key to her happiness, Valjean enters the fray. This is one of the novel's central moral culminations. The man once hunted by society now risks everything to save the young man his daughter loves. At the barricade, Valjean earns the trust of Enjolras and the rebels. The battle is ferocious. The dawn brings government troops, and one by one, the rebels fall. Enjolras is resolute to the last, and Gavroche dies bravely gathering ammunition in the street. The barricade becomes a slaughterhouse, yet Valjean finds Marius, wounded and unconscious, and determines to save him. In a final act of compassion, Valjean has the chance to kill Javert, who was captured by the rebels. Instead, he sets the inspector free. Javert, a man defined by rigid law and order, cannot fathom why Valjean shows mercy. This confounds him, planting a seed of internal conflict that will soon sprout into a tragic resolution. With Marius slung over his shoulder, Valjean escapes through the sewers of Paris, trudging through darkness, filth, and despair, symbolically going through the underworld to bring Marius back to life. After hours of struggle, he emerges, only to encounter Thénardier lurking near a grate, scavenging valuables from the dead. Thénardier doesn't recognize Valjean at first, but demands money to let him pass. Valjean escapes, finally reaching safety and delivering Marius to his grandfather's home, saving the young man's life. After ensuring Marius is safe, Valjean steps out into the city where Javert awaits him. Instead of arresting Valjean on the spot, Javert is strangely silent. He escorts Valjean back home, giving him leave to visit Cosette briefly. In those quiet moments, Javert experiences a moral crisis. Every fiber of his being insists that Valjean is a criminal who must be punished. But Valjean's mercy at the barricade and his unwavering commitment to good deeds contradict Javert's black and white worldview. Javert cannot reconcile law without mercy, justice without compassion. Unable to exist in a universe where the lines have blurred, Javert sets Valjean free and then, in utter despair, takes his own life by throwing himself into the Seine. Javert's suicide is a powerful statement. The man who lived by rigid rules cannot survive in a world that acknowledges grace and transformation. Marius slowly recovers from his injuries. Believing Valjean only to be a distant relative or a benefactor, Marius and Cosette get engaged. Their wedding is a joyous occasion. Valjean gives Cosette a generous dowry, amassed through years of honest labor. He watches as the young couple step into a future bright with possibilities. For Valjean, it's bittersweet. He has raised Cosette and now must let her go, yet he's grateful to see her happy and safe. But all is not settled. On the night of the wedding feast, Thénardier arrives in disguise to blackmail Marius. He claims to have proof that Valjean is a criminal and a murderer. He shows Marius a piece of Marius's own old coat, taken from the corpse Valjean supposedly robbed in the sewers. Instead of condemning Valjean, the evidence leads Marius to realize the truth. It was Valjean who saved his life at the barricade, risking everything to carry him through the sewers. Marius now understands Valjean's boundless goodness. Thénardier, foiled in his scheme, flees to America to seek new opportunities in crime. Marius and Cosette rush to Valjean's side, grateful and repentant. They realize that, out of a misplaced sense of honor, Valjean has been distancing himself from their marriage, afraid that his past might tarnish Cosette's future. They find him at home, weakened and near death. The truth is out. Jean Valjean has spent his life striving for redemption and has achieved it through love and sacrifice. In these final moments, he holds Cosette's hand, receives Marius's gratitude, and prays gently for their happiness. The old candlesticks from the bishop still glow nearby, symbols of the mercy that set his transformation in motion so many years before. As Valjean passes away, we are left with the novel's sweeping themes echoing in our hearts. Les Misérables grapples with the meaning of justice and mercy, showing us a man who overcame bitterness and hatred through the smallest seed of kindness. Hugo's world is one in which social conditions often crush good people, where the law can be blind, and where the poor suffer endlessly. Yet he also shows that human hearts can transcend circumstance. Valjean's moral journey from hardened criminal to saintly benefactor is central. It illustrates that no soul is beyond redemption, that love and compassion can heal deep wounds. Fantine's tragedy reminds us of society's cruelty toward vulnerable women and children. Cosette's rescue underlines how a child's life can blossom if nurtured with kindness. Javert's rigid worldview, shattered by grace, shows that inflexible adherence to rules without understanding the human condition can lead to moral collapse. The Thénardiers, cunning and selfish, represent the ugliest side of human nature. Yet even their existence serves as a contrast to the goodness of others, sharpening the moral outlines of the story. The revolutionary students and the barricades highlight the desperation and hope of a generation striving for a fairer world. Their idealism, even in defeat, symbolizes the eternal human desire for liberty and justice. Marius and Cosette's love stands for renewal, bridging old wounds with new dreams. They inherit a world shaped by Valjean's struggle and Javert's fall, a world where kindness might just stand a chance against misery. Hugo's Paris is almost another character in the story. Its cramped alleys, teeming poor, and grand boulevards all reflect the soul of France during that era. The city's atmosphere is charged with both decay and possibility. The convent's quiet gardens and the barricade's desperate midnight standoff contrast sharply, showing that the setting can shift rapidly from serene refuge to chaotic battlefield. The underworld of the sewers, where Valjean carries Marius, symbolizes the moral journey of wading through the world's filth to save a life. Nature itself is often painted in stark colors. The darkness in which Valjean rescues Cosette, the moonlit garden where Marius and Cosette exchange glances, and the grim dawn breaking over the barricade. By the end of this monumental story, We are meant to feel a kaleidoscope of emotions: pity for those who suffer without cause, admiration for those who forgive the unforgivable, sorrow for the fallen idealists, and hope for the next generation that might do better. The emotional core is Valjean's journey toward moral elevation. Each act of kindness he performs feels like atonement for past wrongs, and each obstacle he overcomes proves humanity's capacity to change. As we reflect on Valjean's death, we're reminded that redemption is often a quiet, private victory. The universe does not always grant fanfare to the righteous. Valjean dies in a modest room, comforted by the knowledge that he did right by others. This quiet heroism resonates long after the final page. Les Misérables is a grand narrative tapestry woven from many threads: social injustice, political upheaval, personal redemption, and the enduring power of love and mercy. Hugo doesn't shy away from showing the darkest corners of human existence: poverty, cruelty, hypocrisy, and despair. But he balances it with radiant acts of goodness. He suggests that while misery is widespread, it is not insurmountable. Jean Valjean's story is the heart of the novel. Starting as a hardened ex-convict, he becomes a savior figure, guiding Cosette into a better life and rescuing Marius from death. His relationship with Fantine's memory, his devotion to honoring the bishop's gift, and his mercy to Javert are testaments to a moral law deeper than the one enforced by uniforms and judges. It's a law of empathy, forgiveness, and love. Marius and Cosette inherit this new moral landscape, one cleansed by Valjean's sacrifices. They represent a fresh start, the possibility that love, compassion, and understanding might break the cycle of suffering. In the end, Les Misérables is about the persistent human longing for a just and compassionate world. Hugo's novel tells us that while we cannot always control the laws or the social conditions that breed misery, we do have a choice in how we respond to them. The story encourages us to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and to believe, as the bishop did, that a single act of mercy can reverberate through countless lives, changing the world one soul at a time. Imagine a bustling spring evening in Moscow, sometime in the 1930s, when the city's literary and cultural elite gather in public parks and cafes, discussing the latest plays, poems, and political gossip. The air hums with modern sensibilities. Strict atheism is the norm, and any mention of religious belief or the supernatural is met with condescension. It's in this environment that Mikhail Bulgakov's novel The Master and Margarita unfolds, introducing us to a strange visitor and his peculiar retinue, who soon cast a spell of chaos over the city. By the end, we've journeyed deep into a tapestry of interwoven narratives, from contemporary Moscow to ancient Jerusalem, from the realms of the mundane to the grand cosmic stage where good and evil wrestle for human souls. In telling this story, we'll go through each major event and character arc, immersing ourselves in the world Bulgakov created, a world where the devil himself strolls beneath Moscow's street lamps. Love defies all barriers, and compassion can transcend time. Our story begins in Moscow's Patriarch's Ponds, a tranquil area where two men, Mikhail Berlioz, the distinguished editor of a literary magazine, and Ivan Bezdomny, a rising poet, are locked in conversation. They debate the existence of Jesus Christ. Berlioz is adamant that Jesus is a mythical figure, nothing more than a legend perpetuated by religious tradition. Ivan follows suit, though less confidently, as he's trying to please Berlioz by writing an anti-religious poem. As their conversation grows more intense, a stranger approaches. He is sharply dressed, foreign-looking, and has a peculiar air of authority about him. He calls himself Professor Woland and, with unsettling calm, insists that Jesus did indeed exist. With bewildering ease, he describes intimate details of Pontius Pilate's meeting with Yeshua HaNatzri in ancient Jerusalem, as if recalling a personal memory rather than a distant historical event. What begins as a debate soon turns into a nightmare. Woland predicts that Berlioz's death is imminent. Before the men can laugh him off as a madman, Berlioz meets a violent fate, slipping on sunflower oil spilled by a mysterious woman. He tumbles on a tram tracks and is decapitated. Ivan, traumatized and desperate to make sense of this horror, chases after Woland and his strange entourage, an absurdly dressed ex-choirmaster named Faggot, also known as Koraviv, a formidable, gun-toting black cat named Behemoth, and a pale, fanged hitman known as Azazello. Ivan's pursuit leads him through the city's winding alleys until he ends up in a madhouse. His frantic attempts to warn others about Woland only convince doctors he's delirious. As this chaos ensues, we drift into a second narrative thread, a story within a story. It's the tale that Woland began to recount at Patriarch's Pons, the encounter between the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate and Yeshua HaNatzri. Suddenly, we're in ancient Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. The sun scorches the city's stones. Pilate, suffering from a terrible headache, is forced to adjudicate the fate of a wandering philosopher named Yeshua. Yeshua has been accused of inciting rebellion, but in conversation, he proves himself a gentle, insightful man who speaks of kindness, truth, and understanding. He unnerves Pilate by discerning the governor's private torment, hinting that true peace comes from the truth. Pilate is deeply moved by Yeshua's sincerity and desperately seeks a way to save him. But politics and fear override mercy. Ultimately, despite Pilate's wishes, Yeshua is condemned to death. The image is haunting. Yeshua, a figure of compassion, is led away under armed guard, and Pilate, racked with conscience, must watch from a palace terrace as the execution proceeds against his will. Back in Moscow, more strange events unfold. Woland, who is no ordinary foreigner, has taken up residence in Berlioz's former apartment. This apartment, notorious for unexplained vanishings, becomes a stage for supernatural mischief. Woland and his retinue launch an unforgettable black magic performance at the Variety Theater. The theater's audience, filled with Moscow's cultural aficionados, is initially delighted by the clever illusions. Money rains down from the rafters, women are gifted new gowns out of thin air, and it seems a marvelous treat. But these pleasures come at a price. As soon as the show ends, the money vanishes or turns into worthless scraps, and the gowns disintegrate. Even more sinister, people start to disappear. Managers of the theater vanish overnight, and the financial overseer finds himself inexplicably teleported to distant Yalta. Through these pranks and punishments, Bulgakov reveals a key theme: the moral emptiness and petty corruption lurking beneath Soviet Moscow's polished literary and theatrical scene. Many who prided themselves on rationality and atheism, on their status within the cultural bureaucracy, now find themselves humiliated and frightened. Woland is no mere mischief maker. He's the devil visiting Moscow, doling out strange justice to hypocrites and opportunists. In the midst of this surreal frenzy, we meet the true protagonists of the novel, the Master and Margarita. The Master was once an aspiring novelist who dared to write a book about Pontius Pilate and Yeshua, exactly the story Woland narrated. The Master poured his soul into this manuscript, attempting to resurrect the truth of Yeshua's existence and Pilate's moral dilemma in a skeptical age. However, When the master tried to publish his work, the Soviet literary world crushed him. Critics ridiculed him, the bureaucracy hounded him, and he lost all hope. He ended up burning his manuscript in despair and voluntarily committing himself to a mental institution, broken by the relentless torment of a hostile literary establishment. Margarita is the master's devoted lover, a beautiful and intelligent woman trapped in a loveless marriage with a wealthy, well-connected husband. She met the master in a chance encounter, a yellow flower in her hand, a spark of recognition in their eyes, and their love blossomed instantly. For a time, they lived together in a secret apartment, passionate, in love, and endlessly discussing the master's novel. She believed fervently in his talent and the truth of his story. When he fell into ruin, disappearing into the asylum, Margarita's heart remained true to him. She pines for his return, for a chance to restore his manuscript, for a miracle that can heal the wounds inflicted by society. Enter Woland once again. This time, he seeks out Margarita. He recognizes her love's strength, something purer and mightier than any bureaucrat's pen or cynic sneer. Woland proposes a strange bargain. If Margarita will serve as the hostess for his annual spring ball, the Walpurgis Night Ball, where the devil entertains a parade of historical villains, murderers, and the damned, he will grant her a wish. Margarita doesn't flinch. Love drives her to accept. She would do anything to save the master and restore his broken spirit, even if it means consorting with the devil himself. The night of the ball arrives, and what a night it is. Azazello gives Margarita a magical cream to apply to her body. As soon as she does, she transforms. She becomes younger, more radiant, lighter than air. She gains the power of flight, leaving her old life behind. She soars above Moscow's rooftops, her heart pounding, a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration filling her veins. She stops by her old apartment, invisible, and witnesses how empty and meaningless her former bourgeois existence was. She even wreaks minor havoc at the apartment of a literary critic who tormented the master, breaking vases and smashing windows unseen, an impish vengeance on the man who nearly drove the master mad. But these small acts are only a prelude. Soon Margarita is whisked away to Woland's surreal residence. She descends a grand staircase, naked under a heavy necklace, with Corvive as her guide. The ball is a cavalcade of the damned. Kings who betrayed their people, poisoners, executioners, and tyrants from centuries past file in. Margarita must greet each guest, offer her arm as they bow, and kiss her hand. She is dignified, regal, and unwavering, her strength of character shining in this infernal setting. The atmosphere is eerie and magnificent. The ballroom's decor defies logic. The music is dissonant yet hypnotic, and a sense of timelessness envelopes them all. Margarita's role as hostess is a kind of moral test. She stands at the crossroads of history's sinners, showing neither fear nor cruelty, just the steadfast determination to earn Woland's promised reward. When the final, gruesome guests have departed, Woland keeps his word. He asks Margarita what she desires most. She could ask for gold, power, or revenge, but she wants none of that. Instead, her wish is merciful and pure. She asks Woland to free the master, to restore him to health, happiness, and the comfort of his beloved manuscript. Woland is pleasantly surprised. He comments that Margarita has asked for something truly noble. He grants her request. The master appears, weak and disoriented, brought forth from the asylum. In a remarkable twist, Woland also returns the master's manuscript, the very one he thought destroyed by flames, now intact. Manuscripts don't burn. Woland says cryptically, implying that true art and truth itself are immortal, surviving all attempts to obliterate them. The reunited lovers are not yet free. Though the master now holds his precious manuscript, he has been too deeply scarred. He no longer fits in Moscow's world, nor does Margarita. Their love and truth have set them apart from ordinary life. Sensing this, Woland confers with his companion, a mysterious female figure who appears only at the novel's end, and decides the Master and Margarita must be granted peace. They cannot return to bourgeois normality, nor do they belong to Woland's retinue. Instead, they'll be offered a merciful release. A final journey awaits them, beyond the boundaries of the city. Before we follow them, let's return to the parallel narrative of Pilate and Yeshua. Throughout the novel, we revisit this ancient storyline in fragments. We saw Pilate condemn Yeshua reluctantly. Later, we watch as the execution unfolds. The sky darkens unnaturally at midday. The cruelty of the Roman soldiers and the agony of the condemned men, Yeshua and two other criminals, contrast with the profound sadness Pilate feels in the distance. After the executions, Yeshua's body is secretly taken away and given a dignified burial by a sympathetic man named Matthew Levi. Pilate remains tormented by his moral failure. He walks alone in his palace, cursed to think forever of the philosopher he let die. In Pilate's soul, a storm rages. He knows he failed to listen to truth and kindness, allowing political expediency to triumph over justice. It's in the novel's climax that these two storylines, Moscow and Jerusalem, intertwine under Woland's cosmic perspective. Woland is not merely there to humiliate corrupt bureaucrats. He also serves as a being who can grant ultimate justice or mercy. In the final chapters, Woland and his entourage mount black horses and ride over the nighttime city, heading toward the hills outside of Moscow's boundaries. They carry with them the Master and Margarita, who follow in a kind of dream state. Suddenly, the scenery shifts. We are no longer in contemporary Moscow, but at a strange borderland where mythical geography merges with spiritual reality. Here, Woland reveals that the Master's reward is not eternal happiness in heaven. He did not earn that, for he lacked total faith, but eternal peace. He and Margarita will live together in a tranquil cottage beyond the reach of pain, memory, and strife. Before granting them rest, Woland passes judgment on Pontius Pilate's fate. Pilate has been spiritually imprisoned for nearly 2,000 years, caught in a limbo, forever replaying his fateful decision, never forgiven, never forgetting the moral truth he encountered too late. The Master, having written Pilate's story, now has the power to resolve it. In a grand symbolic gesture, the Master completes his manuscript and, through his compassionate authorship, frees Pilate. We see Pilate walking with his dog Bunga under a moonlit sky, finally reunited with Yeshua in spirit, freed from the torment of indecision. By finishing the story properly, by acknowledging that mercy can transcend time, the Master grants Pilate peace. This is a profound statement on the power of narrative, imagination, and forgiveness. The Master's art, suppressed and ridiculed in life, becomes an instrument of liberation in the spiritual realm. With Pilate's soul released, Woland guides the Master and Margarita further. Under a moon that glows brighter and a silence that grows deeper, they arrive at a small house nestled in eternal peace. Margarita and the Master enter together, hand in hand. They have escaped the cruelty of the critics, the indifference of the world, and the misunderstandings of their time. In this final gift, Bulgakov offers a moving reflection on the nature of artistic integrity and love. that real creative truth and sincere love cannot be destroyed by persecution or even death. They transcend earthly limitations and find their own timeless sanctuary. Having escorted them to this resting place, Woland and his retinue ride off. They've completed their mission. Dawn breaks over Moscow once again, and the strange incidents of the previous days leave the city's inhabitants baffled. Some remember the bizarre events vividly. Others dismiss them as mass hallucinations or a fluke of spring madness. Ivan Bezdemny, the poet who once chased Woland, transforms into a reflective scholar. Though the asylum released him, he no longer composes the militant anti-religious verses he once wrote. Instead, every spring, on the night of the full moon, Ivan dreams of Pontius Pilate and Yeshua. He sees Pilate's final liberation, feeling a quiet yet potent reassurance that truth and mercy remain possible, even across millennia. These dreams, subtle gifts left by Woland's passage, remind Ivan, and by extension, the reader, that not all mysteries can be rationalized away. Some truths exist beyond the constraints of time, ideology, and logic. What are we to make of all this? Bulgakov's novel, as captured in this summary, weaves together multiple themes: the nature of good and evil, the burden of moral responsibility, the resilience of love, and the transcendence of genuine artistic creation. Woland, though the devil, isn't an archetype of pure malevolence. Rather, he's a judge figure who exposes hypocrisy, punishes petty cruelty, and ultimately respects true love and honest art. He doesn't spread sin. He reveals the sins that already exist and compels people to confront them. Meanwhile, the story of Pilate and Yeshua suggests that even a man of power, influenced by fear and politics, can be redeemed in memory or art. The master's manuscript, miraculously surviving fire, demonstrates the immortality of truth and the written word. Margarita's transformation is equally profound. Initially trapped in a materialistic, empty life, she discovers her capacity for courage and selfless love. She dares to engage with the supernatural, to defy social conventions, and to host the devil's ball, all for the sake of her beloved. Margarita represents the power of love to overcome fear, greed, and despair. Her reward is not earthly riches or fame. It's reuniting with the master and securing for both of them a peace beyond the world's reach. The city of Moscow itself becomes a stage on which these supernatural events unfold. Bulgakov situates the reader in a recognizable modern environment full of petty officials, trendy literary cliques, and relentless materialism. By introducing Woland into this setting, Bulgakov unmasks the absurdity of a society that pretends to be enlightened and rational while actually harboring corruption and cowardice. The transformations, people vanishing, money turning into leaves, a cat speaking and shooting firearms, are a magical lens highlighting the moral failures of everyday life. The setting contributes to the atmosphere, from cramped apartments to grand theaters, from quiet literary salons to the secret police's offices. The city is a tangle of ambition, fear, and longing. Yet overhead, the moon shines as a cosmic witness, indifferent to human folly and receptive to divine truth. Throughout the narrative, a rich layer of humor and irony underscores the drama. The devil's entourage is both terrifying and comical. The giant cat behemoth's antics, such as riding a streetcar or playing pranks on shopkeepers, inject absurdity into scenes of moral reckoning. Korovev's polite manners and ironic commentary, Azazello's deadpan ruthlessness, and Woland's calm, aristocratic demeanor create a dynamic cast of supernatural beings who are as entertaining as they are formidable. This blend of the comic and the profound ensures the story feels vibrant and engaging, never slipping into dry moralizing. In the end, the emotional heart of the novel lies with the Master and Margarita. Their love story provides the soulful core that unites the disparate threads, Moscow and Jerusalem, critique and compassion, despair and redemption. The Master wrote a novel that dared to consider Jesus as a real figure, a man of truth in a time when truth was scorned. For this, he suffered. Margarita risked everything, her honor, her sanity, even her mortal soul, to save him from oblivion. Their dedication to each other and to the truth in the Master's manuscript earns them a reward that the world could not give: peace, freedom from torment, and unity in a spiritual refuge. The concluding image of Pilate walking freely under a gentle moonlight, finally at peace after 2,000 years, closes the circle. Pilate's liberation is the triumph of compassion over guilt, of understanding over misunderstanding. By telling Pilate's story faithfully, the Master heals old wounds. This scene is symbolic of the author's belief in the redemptive power of storytelling itself. Literature, Bulgakov suggests, can reach across centuries, heal ancient rifts, and grant humanity the grace that history often withholds. The Master and Margarita also resonates with its historical context. Bulgakov wrote it during the height of Stalin's repressions, when censorship and fear stifled free expression. The Master's struggles parallel Bulgakov's own frustrations as an author silenced by authoritarian censorship. The Devil's Arrival and the resulting mayhem can be seen as a fantastical critique of a society that publicly denies the spiritual and the metaphysical, only to find itself helpless when confronted by these forces. In this sense, the novel makes a daring statement. Even in a world outwardly defined by materialism and political dogma, the spiritual dimension cannot be fully suppressed. Truth, beauty, and moral reckoning will assert themselves in surprising, unpredictable ways. By the time we finish the novel, we've traveled an extraordinary arc. We began with skeptical intellectuals at Patriarch's Pawns, dismissing the existence of Christ. We end on a plane of cosmic justice, where devils and angels influence human destinies, and where writers have the power to liberate souls across time. The journey is surreal, but its emotional authenticity grounds it. The terror and the humor, the love and the despair, the confusion and the clarity, these belong to real human experience, even if delivered through the lens of magic. In conclusion, The Master and Margarita is a richly layered narrative that defies easy categorization. By summarizing it in full, from Berlioz's tragic demise and Ivan's descent into madness, to the Master's heartbreak and Margarita's fearless bargain, from Pilate's moral anguish in ancient Jerusalem to the final granting of peace, we see how Bulgakov wove a tapestry of themes: the tension between spiritual truth and political conformity, the endurance of love and art against cruelty and indifference, and the ultimate possibility of redemption. The entire novel invites reflection on moral choices, the meaning of art, and the persistence of hope. In its final moments, as the Master and Margarita settle into their eternal refuge, and the moonlight bathes Pilate's forgiven spirit, we understand that true wisdom and compassion transcend all boundaries of time, place, and imagination. Let's begin by stepping into the world of Midnight's Children, a sprawling, richly layered narrative that blends personal family history with the grand sweep of India's tumultuous 20th century evolution. Written by Salman Rushdie and published in 1981, this novel takes us through an intricate tapestry of events, from the final days of British colonial rule in the Indian subcontinent, through the dawn of independence, the troubled formation of Pakistan, the upheavals of war, and the era of political strife and emergency measures. At the heart of this mosaic stands our narrator and protagonist, Salim Sinai, whose very existence is inseparably linked to the life of the newly independent nation. Born at the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, the precise moment India gained its freedom, Salim is endowed with extraordinary telepathic powers, as are other children born in that first hour of independence. Their fates, talents, and misfortunes are all tied to the destiny of the subcontinent itself. What follows is a spoiler-filled summary that will guide you through the novel's complicated family lines, historical milestones, supernatural occurrences, and personal tragedies. By the end, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of the narrative's flow, the characters' inner transformations, the major themes that animate the story, and the emotive resonance that lingers long after the final page. Before diving into the chronological unfolding of events, it's vital to understand how the story is told. Salim Sinai recounts his life from a pickle factory in the late 1970s, where he sits in a state of physical disintegration, falling to pieces, as he puts it, dictating his memories to a patient and sometimes skeptical companion, Padma, a woman who works at the factory. This framing device immerses us in a dual time frame, the present moment of Salim's retelling, and the sprawling tapestry of his past. Padma's occasional interruptions and reassurances keep the narrative grounded, reminding us that Salim's story is a reflection, a grand work of memory, subject to the whims, anxieties, and biases of the storyteller. Salim, the narrator, believes he must finish this tale before he quite literally cracks apart. This sense of impending doom creates a tension that hums beneath the narrative, as if time is always running out. From the start, we know that Salim's life mirrors the trajectory of India as a nation. His fortunes and misfortunes are inseparably linked to historical events. The personal and the political will become indistinguishable as we proceed. To understand Salim's birth at midnight and the circumstances that led to it, we must first trace the roots of his family. We begin in Kashmir, before independence, with Salim's grandfather, Adam Aziz, a doctor educated in Germany. Upon returning home, Dr. Aziz struggles to reconcile Western modernity with the old world traditions and religious faith of his homeland. This cultural and spiritual tension within him sets a precedent. It's he who first bends down to pray on a frozen field and, hitting his nose on the ground, experiences a symbolic moment of doubt and spiritual disconnection. Adam Aziz's first encounters with Nasim Ghani, who would become his wife and Salim's grandmother, are conducted strangely. He sees her only through a perforated sheet as he's called upon to treat different ailments in various parts of her body. Their love blossoms indirectly, without direct sight, culminating in a marriage that represents a union of old and new. Yet this marriage is fraught with differing values. Adam grows more secular and rational, while Nasim clings to religious tradition and conservative views. This tension will reverberate through generations. After marrying, Adam and Nasim settle in Agra, near the Taj Mahal. They raise a family during a period when India is heading towards independence. Their household becomes a microcosm of the country's transitions. Arguments between religion and secularism, old and new ways of life, hope and fear. Among their children is Amina Sinai, Salim's mother, who will later navigate a web of relationships and identities before giving birth to our protagonist. Also entangled in the family's life is Nadir Khan, a gentle, intellectual poet who takes refuge in the Aziz household after running afoul of political powers. He will, for a time, be betrothed to Amina, then known as Mumtaz, but fate and politics intervene. Eventually, Mumtaz divorces Nadir Khan and marries Ahmed Sinai, changing her name to Amina. The Sinais will move to Bombay, seeking prosperity in the new India. It's in these shifting settings from Kashmir to Agra, then onward to big cities, that we see a pattern emerge. Each generation tries to redefine itself in the face of India's changing identity. As independence looms, these personal upheavals mirror the looming historical watershed. Then comes the pivotal moment. On August 15, 1947, at the precise stroke of midnight, India becomes an independent nation. At that exact moment, Salim Sinai is born in Bombay, amidst the jubilant noise of celebration and fireworks. Unbeknownst to Salim's family, another baby boy, Shiva, is born at the same time, in the same hospital, to a poor street entertainer's wife. A nurse named Mary Pereira, motivated by love and idealistic impulses, switches the name tags of the two newborns. This action secretly swaps their destinies. The wealthy Sinai baby and the poor entertainer's son exchange lives. From this swap emerges one of the novel's core themes: how fate and social position can turn on the smallest, most arbitrary moments. Salim, raised as a Sinai, grows up believing himself to be the child of privilege and education. Shiva, meanwhile, grows up in poverty, but with remarkable strength and cunning. Both boys, and hundreds of others born in that first hour of independence, are part of an extraordinary group known as the Midnight's Children, each endowed with magical powers. Salim's special gift is telepathy, a powerful ability that allows him to communicate with all the other Midnight's children, forming a kind of psychic conference where he tries to unite them. But these children's powers vary widely, reflecting the vast diversity of India itself. This magical element of the story weaves myth and fantasy into the historical fabric. Through Salim's telepathic Midnight Children's Conference, the novel creates a metaphor for India's astonishing pluralism. So many languages, religions, castes, and classes struggling to find unity. Salim, in his youthful idealism, hopes to rally these special children to do good, to represent a positive force in the newborn nation. But as we'll see, their unity is not easily maintained. Salim's childhood unfolds against a vibrant backdrop of Bombay, Mumbai, in the 1950s. We encounter a host of memorable relatives and neighbors who surround the young Salim. There's his father, Ahmed Sinai, a businessman struggling with alcohol and financial instability, and his mother, Amina, who carries emotional scars from her first marriage. Extended family members, each with their quirks and obsessions, populate Salim's world, contributing to a rich domestic tapestry that mirrors India's own complicated familial ties. As a boy, Salim becomes aware of his telepathic abilities, though at first he only senses the presence of others, like a radio receiving static. Over time, he learns to tune into distinct voices, discovering that all children born in that magical hour have gifts. Some can travel through time, some have incredible intellect, others can shift their gender at will, and so on. Notably, Shiva, Salim's mirrored counterpart, has the gift of warlike prowess, a kind of martial genius. Their differences in temperament and social position foreshadow conflicts to come. While Salim wants to use their abilities to foster unity and understanding, Shiva dismisses these lofty ideals. He's more pragmatic and aggressive. This tension reflects India's struggles. Idealists versus realists, pacifists versus warriors, secularists versus nationalists. As Salim grows, India's political scene intensifies. The country that gained independence at Salim's birth is now navigating the messy process of creating a cohesive national identity. Religious tensions rise, linguistic states are reorganized, and political corruption looms. The Sino-Indian War, the border disputes, and the lingering trauma of partition provide a constant, unsettling backdrop. Salim's family experiences upheavals too. Ahmed Sinai's business flounders, and he faces a personal breakdown. The family moves to Pakistan for a time as tensions between India and Pakistan escalate, with the hope of finding stability in Karachi. Salim's life in Pakistan is marked by a loss of innocence. The glamorous images he held of his family's unity and his own place in the world start to crack. The Sinais do not find the success they hoped for. Instead, they are caught up in the political and social ferment of a country forging its own identity separate from India's. Salim's existence increasingly becomes an allegory for the subcontinent's fractured spirit. When war breaks out, first the Indo-Pakistani conflicts of the 1960s, then the Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971, Salim finds himself literally in the middle of history. During these turbulent years, personal tragedies strike. Many family members die or disappear, forcing Salim to confront loss on an intimate scale that echoes the broader national tragedies. By the mid-1960s, Salim struggles to maintain the Midnight's Children Conference. The children, no longer innocents, become divided by their regional, religious, and ideological differences. Where once they could gather telepathically in a spirit of curiosity, now their differences tear them apart. Some reject Salim's leadership and idealism. Others vanish into their own paths. Shiva, who despises Salim's naive unity dreams, becomes a key antagonist. He represents the hard edge of power and physical might, showing that brute strength often prevails in a contentious world. The disintegration of the conference parallels the fraying fabric of India's unity. The linguistic reorganization of states, the rising sectarianism, and the numerous political cracks mean that the dream of a single, harmonious India remains elusive. Salim is devastated by this failure. Not only does he lose this group he considered family, he also loses faith in his own special role. Instead of being the unifier, he becomes a witness to fragmentation. After tragedies in the family and the failure of the conference, Salim ends up in Pakistan again during the 1971 war. Traumatized and in shock from losing so many relatives, he suffers amnesia. His memory, which he once used to spin his identity, now deserts him. Symbolically, as the subcontinent splits again, this time East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh, Salim's own sense of self dissolves. In this state, Salim becomes embroiled in the war almost accidentally. He's taken in by a group known as the Magician's Ghetto, a troupe of performers and oddities that includes Parvati the Witch, another Midnight's Child who can conjure illusions. This period of Salim's life is marked by disorientation. He exists as a tool of history, swept along by events he can neither understand nor control, a literal soldier forced into a war he never desired. Eventually, Salim returns to India, more broken than before, and Parvati the Witch helps him re-establish some semblance of a life. In a desperate attempt at normalcy and love, Parvati tries to build a family with Salim. When Salim fails to marry her according to societal expectations, Parvati turns to Shiva, who by now is a powerful figure in the Indian army. She becomes pregnant with Shiva's child. Ironically, Salim will later raise this child, Adam Sinai, as his own, continuing the cycle of uncertain parentage and mixed identities. One of the novel's climactic moments occurs during Indira Gandhi's emergency, 1975 to 1977, a period marked by the suspension of democratic rights, mass sterilization campaigns, and the stifling of political opposition. Under the guise of national discipline, the state cracks down on freedoms. For Salim and the other surviving Midnight children, this emergency is more than a political event. It's the final, violent clampdown on their magical legacy. The government, represented symbolically and literally by Shiva, who by now is closely associated with the authoritarian regime, hunts down Salim and the other special children. In a cruel twist, the children's powers are surgically removed. This act of sterilization and enforced conformity shows how the state crushes individuality and diversity, the very qualities that define the Midnight's children. Salim, who once believed these children to be the hope of the nation, sees that hope destroyed by realpolitik and authoritarian force. The emergency becomes a metaphor for the death of dreams, both personal and national. Without their extraordinary gifts, the Midnight's children are just ordinary citizens, forced to live under a regime that fears and punishes difference. Shiva's role in all this is crucial. The baby switched at birth, who should have grown up in Salim's privileged place, ends up wielding the blunt instrument of power, brutality, and force, aligning with a state that represses the very ideals Salim cherished. The rivalry between these two brothers thus reflects the ongoing battle in India's heart. The struggle between compassion and cruelty, unity and fragmentation, idealism and cynicism. In the wake of the emergency's end, Salim is left a hollowed-out version of his former self. He survives, as does Parvati's child, whom Salim names Adam Sinai. But the world he knew, the magical link to India's birth hour, is gone. Parvati, tragically, does not survive. She dies, leaving Salim with her child, an echo of how Salim himself was raised by parents who did not know his true origins. Having lost his telepathy, his family, and nearly everyone he cared about, Salim tries to find meaning in the ordinary. He ends up working at a pickle factory in Bombay, engaged in the careful preservation of spices and flavors. The pickles become a metaphor for memory and storytelling. Just as pickling preserves food for future consumption, Salim's narrative preserves the stories of his family, the Midnight's children, and the nation in words and images. He's trying to chutnify his history, capturing its essence in a form that can outlast political disasters. Throughout the story, identity is a central theme. Salim's very existence is defined by a switch destiny. The notion that a single action, a nurse-swapping name tags, can set one life on a path of privilege and another on a path of hardship is a profound commentary on social inequality and the randomness of fate. Salim struggled to understand who he is, Muslim or Indian, privileged or disenfranchised, special or ordinary, reflects India's own struggle to define itself as a secular democracy made up of countless communities. History and memory are another key focus. The narrative repeatedly emphasizes that history is not a fixed record, but a fluid story shaped by those who tell it. Salim, as narrator, often acknowledges that he might be mixing things up, reordering events for dramatic effect, or giving too much importance to personal moments. In this way, Rushdie suggests that how we remember the past, what we preserve, and what we omit is as important as what actually happened. Memory becomes an act of creation, and Salim's story is a grand act of memory-making. He's writing India's narrative through the lens of his own life. Diversity and fragmentation resonate both in the human characters and the magical children. The Midnight's Children represent India's huge variety, geographical, cultural, and linguistic differences compressed into a single generation. Initially united by a shared birthday, they fall apart because of the very differences they embody. Just as post-independence India failed to stay immune to religious strife and political corruption, the children cannot remain a harmonious group. The novel suggests that true unity is elusive. Yet, it's the attempt to reconcile differences, rather than the success, that defines the moral effort of a nation and an individual. Power and corruption loom large. The story grapples with how idealistic visions, like those of a grand, secular, democratic India, are undermined by unscrupulous leaders, violence, and authoritarian crackdowns. Shiva's ascent to power and the sterilization of the Midnight's Children during the emergency are metaphors for a state apparatus that fears the creative chaos of its people's diversity. This critique extends beyond India's borders, highlighting universal concerns about how political systems handle dissent and difference. As Salim concludes his narrative, we find him in the pickle factory, engaged to Padma, trying to finish his story before he falls apart. His physical disintegration symbolizes the fragility of memory and identity. He is quite literally cracking under the weight of historical, personal, and narrative burdens. However, despite all the losses, Salim's life is not devoid of meaning. He passes on the mantle to Adam Sinai, the next generation, who carries within him the potential for renewal. Even if the Midnight's Children are scattered or stripped of their powers, their legacy endures in memory and story. In these final moments, the novel ends on a note that is simultaneously tragic and hopeful. Salim does not pretend that all the damage done can be undone. He's painfully aware that the golden promise of that midnight birth in 1947 did not guarantee a happily ever after for the nation or for himself. But the fact that he can tell this story, preserving it in chutney form for future listeners, suggests that hope lies in the act of storytelling itself. By sharing these memories, he ensures that the lessons of his life and generation might guide future ones. In short, narrative becomes an act of cultural and historical preservation. Reading or hearing about Midnight's Children, one cannot help but feel the intensity of Salim's personal emotional journey. He begins with mythic grandeur, a baby born at the exact moment of independence, destined for greatness. He befriends extraordinary children with miraculous abilities. But as the narrative progresses, we see those abilities founder on the hard rocks of real-world politics and violence. We experience Salim's terror during wars, his heartbreak at family deaths, and the crushing disappointment of the emergency. By the end, we understand his longing to make sense of a life that has slipped through his fingers as the nation's idealistic dawn turned into a muddled midday and a stormy afternoon. The emotional truth of the story emerges from these tensions between hope and despair, unity and disintegration. The novel never provides an easy resolution, much as real history does not. Instead, it encourages us to appreciate the complexity of identity and the importance of memory. Rushdie's narrative is notoriously rich in sensory details. Though this is a summary, it's worth emphasizing how the novel immerses us in the smells, tastes, and sights of the subcontinent. From the spices in the kitchens where Naseem and Amina cook, to the bustling street life of Bombay, to the grandeur and decay of old mansions, the story's atmosphere is thick with textures. We encounter the scent of pickles and chutneys that Salim will later produce, and these culinary motifs become metaphors for preserving history's flavors. This sensory richness is not just decorative. It underscores the theme that identity, national, cultural, personal, is not just an abstract concept. It's lived daily, tasted in food, heard in languages, and seen in architecture. Through Salim's journey, we realize that understanding India's story means engaging with its kaleidoscopic sensory reality. By the time we've journeyed through the entire narrative, we appreciate the magnitude of what Rushdie attempted and what Salim's Sinai represents. Midnight's Children is ultimately a love letter to the complexity of India, acknowledging that its identity cannot be pinned down easily. Through Salim's voice, we see that India's birth was accompanied by high hopes, miraculous potential embodied by the Midnight's Children, and a hunger for unity. Yet, as decades pass, politics, war, sectarian strife, and authoritarian measures dismantle these dreams. Unity frays, children disperse, powers vanish. What remains is a man narrating his story into a pickle jar, an image that poignantly captures both loss and endurance. In the end, Salim's life and India's narrative blur so completely that we cannot separate them. His personal heartbreak echoes the disillusionment of a nation that struggled to live up to its founding ideals. His survival and act of storytelling hint that, despite everything, memory endures. And with memory comes the possibility of understanding and, perhaps, future redemption. Midnight's Children does not give us a neat, feel-good ending. Instead, it invites reflection. It provokes questions about fate, identity, and history. It challenges us to consider what it means to inherit a nation's birthright and bear the burden of its shortcomings. Most importantly, it reminds us that the stories we tell and how we choose to preserve them shape our understanding of who we are and where we come from. By the novel's conclusion, we have witnessed Salim's entire trajectory, from miracle child to wounded survivor, from would-be unifier of a magical generation to a solitary chronicler, preserving the taste of history for generations to come. In this sense, the story's emotional journey concludes with a bittersweet awareness. Hope and disappointment walk hand in hand, and the past, no matter how painful, can be preserved, examined, and understood if we have the courage to tell the story truthfully, with all its fractures and ambiguities.